I'm Dick Gordon. This is The Story. Just in case you're one of those people who wanted to tell Facebook that you don't like the way the company is managing its privacy policy, you're too late. Voting on that was only open for 1 week, and it's now closed. Chances are you didn't even know the vote was underway. This past week, even the people at Facebook have been way more interested in the diminishing value of their shares than the challenges to the way they use your personal information. Max Schrems is a law student in Austria. He's also the leader of a group called Europe versus Facebook. He's been working to get Facebook to protect the privacy of its users. He's learned an awful lot about Facebook in the process. This started for Max when he found out just how much data Facebook was holding on him.
So I was writing a paper, and as a basis I wanted to have my data from Facebook so that I actually know what I'm writing about and what I might be complaining about. And it took me 22 emails going back and forth and a little effort. But in the end, I got that data file from Facebook, which was a PDF of 1,222 pages. The really funny thing about it was that they really sent us all my deleted information, all stuff like that they should usually not have.
Facebook had 1,222 pages of information on you.
Yeah, that's, partly that information is not a big issue. It's stuff that you post, and of course they hold that then. But a lot of information is also information that Facebook is generating. For example, there is a data category called last location, where they try to figure out the GPS coordinates of the place you've been last time. And there are other things like, for example, removed friends. So if you delete your friends on Facebook, they're not actually deleted, they just move to a list that's called like deleted friends or removed friends. But you can still see who has deleted whom like 5 years ago. And they hold a lot of that data, and that was kind of the interesting thing. I got 57 data categories, but altogether we can now prove that they have at least 84 of every one.
It sounds like you know a lot more about this than I do. So when you found out that much information was being held on Max Schrems, I mean, what was your reaction? Were you just sort of, aha, I knew this? Or were you sort of, holy smokes, what am I involved with here?
It was a mixture of both. I expected it to a certain extent because pretty much everyone does just whatever they want to do in cyberspace right now. And I was mainly surprised about them being so dumb to send it all out. Because usually if you make an access request under European law, corporations usually respond with, no, we don't have anything on you, we don't know anything about it, blah, blah, blah. So they normally try to turn you down and never really give the information out. And the funny thing in that case is that someone at Facebook just didn't know what they were doing in sending us all that thing. So that was the big point of surprise to me, that they were just dumb enough to send it out. The content was not too surprising to me, but it was, of course, surprising to everybody else that thought that Facebook is actually deleting stuff if you hit the delete button. Pretty much what we discovered is that deleting on Facebook means that you hide things from yourself, but that's pretty much it.
Why does it matter to you to know what they have and how much they have?
I think we're like in the age of information, as we always say, and information is control, and information about a person is control over the person. For example, in my data set, I'm studying law, a thing where you usually get very conservative bosses later, in Austria at least. And a lot of the information that is held there and that is pretty much undeletable on Facebook right now is information that, if it gets to the wrong hands, might harm my future for a whole lot. And if you realize that, you kind of become worried that something might happen. Of course, it's not always that likely, but the more data we generate and the more, for example, applications Facebook has, the harder it is to really keep that data within the servers of Facebook. Facebook itself says, for example, that they cannot guarantee that other people can't look at it. So that's, for example, one thing in their terms that they say. It could be possible that someone else sees your data that should actually not see it. And having that in background, it gives you that general fear. And it's interesting because I think it's bigger in Europe than in other areas of the world. And I also think that we have like this general fear of they have something and there is potential for a problem, right, which already gets people like angry. Especially German-speaking areas already afraid when there is a potential for a problem, while others are more like looking at it in the way that they say, so far nothing ever happened, so we're all going to be positive about the future.
But part of this is just the simple, basic personal side of it, where you might have, as a teenager, put up a photograph of yourself playing with friends on a beach in the south of Spain, and you're going, I don't don't really want my boss 10 years from now to be able to retrieve that picture, right?
Yeah, that's one of the problems, that our personality has different phases and also different context. I'm behaving differently at my workplace than I do with my friends, and I behave differently now than I will probably in 15 years. And having control over your own information guarantees that I can, so to say, like reinvent myself probably in 15 years. While if someone else knows so many details about me as Facebook does, for example, they hold 300 pages of personal messages, like chat messages on me. Most of them were deleted. That gives you so much idea of, for example, what I voted last election, what I did here and there, or what I thought about, I don't know, political things, demonstrations I've gone to or that I was invited to. All these details can harm you a whole lot, especially if it gets into the wrong hands. Even though I don't have anything I got a fear of, but it's just that potential that if you have enough information about another person, if you put it together in the right way, you can always make it look bad about the person. And that is a potential as well that brings you like a certain creep factor in.
So you pressed on, you decided to do something about this. You went to Facebook's European head office in Ireland and said what?
What we did is we went to the Irish Data Protection Commission. There's actually an authority in every European country that is responsible for data protection and privacy. And since Facebook has their headquarters for every operation outside of the US and Canada in Ireland, mainly because of tax reasons, they pay about 2 to 3% tax there instead of the 35% in the US. And that's the interesting thing there, that this authority is then applying European law for any user that's outside of the US and Canada. And we pretty much summarized all the things where we had perfect proof that they're in violation of European data protection law, which is rather strict, and filed that at the relevant office. The problem is that the Irish Data Protection Commission is actually lacking people that are in good knowledge of the case, that they're lacking personnel as well. And they're also afraid that Facebook might bring on the thing to courts if they decide too strictly. And so right now we're still in the process before the Irish Data Protection Commission to try to find a solution, but apparently it's not going to work. We also had a couple of meetings with Facebook. We're in direct contact to try to sort out a lot of these things. But it seems like the whole thing is going to go on into the Irish court system at this point, which is going to be interesting because it will be one of the prime privacy cases and data protection cases that have ever been around in Europe. So that's kind of the process we're right now in.
I want to go back to something you said a moment ago. You got a couple of meetings with Facebook executives. I mean, that's a lot more attention than I've ever heard anybody getting from Facebook, people who are upset with them. Why did they meet with you? How did you manage that?
And pretty much it's really the biggest case they're having right now. They have a legal team of 15 people right now in Ireland that's just working on our complaints. Right. So it is really the biggest case they ever had, and also the one case where there could be serious enforcement and serious changes to their platform.
Right, okay, so help me out with that. What is Facebook worried about here? What are they afraid might happen?
I think they're mainly afraid that their system, their exploitation of user data, the way they're doing it right now, is not going to work on anymore. The problem we actually have is that they have a total monopoly on social media, which I personally think is a really cool tool. I'm still on Facebook. I'm using it a whole lot. The problem is that users don't really have a choice to go anywhere else because all their friends are on Facebook. If you go to another platform, you're pretty much alone there. So that's the underlying problem, and that brings you to the point where you actually have to go through things like data protection law to really claim your rights back, because the market is not delivering that right now. In the end, Facebook is just a huge drilling place for drilling as much oil as possible, drilling as much data as possible, which is kind of their new oil. And if there is some authority that says, hey, stop a little drilling and do a little less here, that might be a big issue for their future business.
Max Schrems kept on organizing. He knew that if he could get enough people to comment on Facebook's policies, he could trigger a worldwide vote. Facebook announced that voting period would start on Friday, June 1st, and end 1 week later. So, as I said earlier, it's already over. Max says not only was a week way too short for a voting period, but he also says the choices weren't great. Stick with the current privacy policy or vote for an even more permissive one. And that's not all.
The problem is that 30% of the worldwide users have to take part in the election, and Facebook was hiding it that well that about 0 point something % of the worldwide user even put in any vote on it.
Well, wait a second.
Most of the people,
how many people would 30% of the worldwide users represent?
That would be like 200 and a couple million people, so about the electorate of the whole US. Correct. And so Facebook made sure that that's not going to go through and that they can do whatever they want to do. I think it's kind of funny that they try to promote that they're like a democratic network and the user has some participation. But if the user is actually trying to get that participation, they're trying to turn you down and trying to avoid all that. It's a understanding of democracy as in China, more or less. They have an election, but they're hiding the polling place. So just to make sure that no one is actually taking part in it.
This is a really interesting point for Facebook because they have gone public just in the last couple of weeks, and that makes them accountable to a few other agencies as a publicly traded company. But the thing that I'm thinking about is this. The one piece of value that they have that they can offer to advertisers is your data and my data. And so they must be very worried about any rules that would be put in place that would restrict their use of that, particularly now when they're trying to establish that they really have this value.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I don't know if that company only has the possibility to make money out of our data. Mainly, it's the time of users that are spent on the page. That's the most interesting thing. And that is pretty much dependent on the content Facebook is delivering, and that's content that we all put onto Facebook. And that's kind of an interesting development that people are posting way less than they did before in the US as well as in Europe. In Europe, there is a new regulation by the European Union proposed that will go through very likely in this year or the next, in one way or the other, that will be especially targeting Facebook to not be allowed to do all this data harvesting anymore that do right now. And as the European market is still the biggest economy worldwide, this will tremendously harm Facebook's possibilities to really sell ads. We're thinking that they just got to go other directions. They got to think of if they can really make that much money off the user, if a social network is even made for like huge profits. It's surely made for making profits that are sustainable, but I don't know if it's a platform where you can make these profits that the guys on the Wall Street actually think they can make out of it. It's going to be very interesting what happens to Facebook, if Facebook is even there in 5 years anymore, if people just got fed up with it, or if it was just regulated in a way that they cannot make that much money anymore. So probably we see Facebook being over its peak right now as well. But that's pretty much speculation. I just think it's interesting how it's developing right now.
Do you ever think about just shutting your Facebook page down and saying, you know, I'm choosing not to play with you guys now?
Yeah, I mean that's like one option that I always get, and I think it makes sense for a lot of people. But in the end, it's a cool tool, and I would not see myself changing because they make mistakes. I would rather see that they make mistakes, so they gotta change. I think the option to just leave is not really making anything better in the world. It's also, as I said, one of the standard forms of communication for my generation. So it's a little bit of, you know, if you don't like to be, I don't know, tracked on your cell phone, just throw away your cell phone and don't use it anymore. That can't be the solution. I think in a democratic society, there's got to be the interest of most of the people be respected by a corporation like Facebook. And that's kind of the way we're going, and not just logging off and leaving the prom alone.
Max Schrems, the law student, expects all this will end in a European courtroom. We have a link to his website on ours at thestory.org. And Facebook has put out a statement concerning its responsibilities here. We have the full text of that also on our website, but I'll give you an idea of what they're saying. Facebook's saying, our commitment to greater transparency, accountability, and responsiveness will not change. We will explore ways to bring user suggestions and concerns before Facebook's management. We will explore ways to tap into the insight and expertise of Facebook user communities worldwide. We will explore proposals that offer innovative approaches for making user participation more useful as Facebook evolves beyond its 1 billionth user.